Shana Tova. 3 months ago, I found myself getting off a tiny plane in a small southern coastal town. An airport with only one terminal, just a few gates, a plane with 15 rows, and I was in the last one. I walked off the plane, waited briefly for my bag at baggage claim, and then stepped outside. Outside into the late evening North Carolina humidity, thick and heavy, looked out at all the clouds and the trees, looking out at a place I'd once called home. This small town that snuck its way into my heart when I was 22 and settled there. This place where I first learned how to be on my own, a place I moved knowing no one and having no job, a place I just chose, packing up my life in my car and driving there. I stood there, breathing in the humid air, thinking of all those nights when the humidity was high and the hurricanes were coming. And then I got in my rental car, remembering the last time I had visited when the only car they could give me was a red truck bigger than anything I had ever seen in my life. As I drove away from the airport this time, it felt like coming home. I knew exactly where I was, where to turn, where not to turn on the one-way streets. I had not been back in 7 years, but there it was, my same favorite street overgrown with mossy trees, the downtown where I lived in an apartment by the river, 2 floors above a salon with a weird name that no one could ever quite understand or pronounce. This little town, tucked into the coast, all of its contours so familiar to me, as though we'd known each other a long time. One of the places I saw right away was the first restaurant where I ever worked, the old breakfast and lunch haunt that was still, now, unchanged. The next day, I went in, the same exterior doors that never seemed like they really locked, same old leather booths at the front and wooden booths at the back, same host stand at the front with a sign asking you to wait to be seated, same open kitchen, uneven tiles that we tripped on constantly, same red counter bar, specials scrawled on a huge chalkboard on the wall. It felt exactly the same. One of the servers was wearing one of the diner shirts I still have in my closet. I remembered all those 6 a.m. mornings and mopping the floors and marrying the ketchups and the owner yelling at us and all the friendships made and forged in defiance of him and commitment to each other and this place. I remembered the 3 older men who came in every day to eat lunch and play cards. I remembered the scary attic and the shared tips and the double shifts and the working 6 days in a row. It all came flooding back to me. A whole version of myself and my life that barely shows up now. But there it was, just inside those not quite closed old doors. And when I settled on a stool at the bar, looking at a menu I could have still recited verbatim a decade later, I saw one person was still there. Someone from before, a server I worked with 10 years prior. We recognized each other right away. She ran up to hug me, and then I noticed, and she shared that a lot had changed for her. She was in the middle of chemo treatment for 2 forms of cancer that had shown up in her body. They had a GoFundMe for her, had done a fundraiser at the restaurant, and through it all, she was still showing up to work. She told me, a few months out from her surgeries and treatments being complete. There she was, same humor, same tiny notepad she wrote people's orders on, left-handed scrawl like mine. I left the restaurant that day after sitting at the red counter bar and eating the same thing I always ordered 10 years ago and reuniting with my old friend. And I cried. I couldn't stop crying. I was overcome with emotion about all the pieces of myself that this place brought up for me, the version of myself that I could only access by being back in that place, a place that was so formative in making me who I am. And in being back there, I remembered all of it. And I finally could reckon with some of it, the lost relationships, the lost time of my early 20s when everything was just starting to fall into place, the ways we were mistreated there and how little power we had to challenge it. The person I was then, the faults, the insecurities, the learning, the innocence, and the person I was now, the faults, the insecurities, the learning. I had lived so many other places since then. Lost loved ones, gone to grad school, lived abroad, had my family grow, lost friends, found myself, struggled with direction and purpose, wondered about so many things, worried for the future, become a rabbi, seen up close day in and day out how quickly our lives can change. She, my 22-year-old self, would not have believed where my life is now. She would be so proud of where I am, how hard I worked to get here, the circuitous path it all took. And also, there was a lot of grief in going back, a deep longing for a life that felt so simple and good and easy. I felt it all. And she was there, my 22-year-old self, outside that diner with me on that street where we rushed around to get things inside before the hurricanes, where people had waited around the block for a table. She was outside that diner with me while I cried. There's something about going back. And tonight, we're reminded of that. Here together in this room, the same one we were in last year. And a lot of it probably feels the same. Maybe you're sitting in the same seats with the same friends or family, parked your car in the same lot, walked over here, made sure to bring an ID with you, stood in line for security, came into the building, were greeted by someone at the door, got your books, asked questions, and made your way to a seat. And we've done all the same liturgy tonight. You've sung the same prayers, same melodies, same words, same clergy and davening team. It's all the same. But it's been a year since we were here together on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and it's been a very complicated and grief-laden year at that. It's been a year and a lot has changed for all of us in the world, in this country, in our lives, and in ourselves. But there's something about returning to a place you've been before, a physical place in the world. There's something about being back in a place that can be a catalyst for us to go inward, to look at ourselves, to let things surface that otherwise may remain unseen. In this time, in this season, and especially in these 10 days we are beginning tonight, leading us from now until Yom Kippur, we are reminded to go inward, to look at ourselves, to take stock, to see what's there. And so often we think of that as being a quiet, solitary, internal experience, a mostly concealed one. We sit alone at home and we try to evaluate ourselves, the year we've had, the relationships in our lives, where we need to do some repair. Maybe we meditate or we journal about it, and then we go out into the world at that point and we do the work. This is how we think of the process of tshuva. But what if tshuva is also a return to a place, not just a return to self or repentance or repair? What if we need to physically go back to a place? But what if we can't? What if we can't go back to see the version of ourselves from a few months ago or last year or more than a decade ago working at a diner? What if the place we want to go isn't accessible to us anymore? A home we've left, a place so far away we can't get back there, a place that's gone. If we can't go back physically, then maybe being in this room tonight or over the next 10 days can be a stand-in for us. Maybe this is the place that will surface things you have forgotten from when you were in this room last year or 4 years ago or a decade ago. Maybe you'll remember someone you want to reconnect with. Maybe a prayer you heard tonight or a song will transport you back to a part of you that you forgot. Maybe the spiritual experience of the high holidays can be an entry point into return. Maybe equipped with this liturgy and season and friends and family and community, we can put ourselves back in a place in our minds. Or maybe that won't quite be enough. Maybe instead, listen to a song you know will take you back to a specific time and place. Eat the food that you know only exists for you in that time and place. Call someone from that season of your life who you haven't spoken with in years. Put on the old, well-worn t-shirt that still lives at the bottom of your drawer, the one that you wore every day in that time and place. Look at the pictures that will bring you back. Find something outside yourself to help you return to that place, to that self, even if you can't physically go back. Coming back to the same place matters. When we, in our tradition, finish learning a masechet, a tractate of Talmud, we say a prayer, one we only say upon the completion of a book, Hadran Alach. It opens as follows, Hadran Alach v'hadrach alan. We will return to you, and you will return to us. The prayer goes on, Datan Alach v'datach alan. Our minds will be on you, your mind will be on us. We will not forget you, you will not forget us. Even as we move forward, we will always come back. We will always return. And every time we do, we will learn something about ourselves. When we return to the text, it will unearth something about us. It's not just returning to the text to see something in the text differently. It's returning to the text to see something in ourselves differently. And that doesn't require us to go physically back to a place, but we get transported back to a place through the text. It does the work to help us go inward. The return to the text helps us see something we couldn't have seen otherwise, to see these pieces of ourselves. Pieces we will carry somewhere, always, even if it takes going back to the same place much later to remember them. Our tradition also understands a return not only to certain learning, but to place, a physical place. In this season of tshuva, repentance, repair, Rambam reminds us of this. In part of his descriptions of tshuva in the Mishnah Torah, he explains 6 things a person can do to find a path toward repair. Among these are oseh tzedakah kefi kocho, give tzedakah, do justice in whatever way you can. Umitrachek harbe min hadavar shechata bo, distance yourself from the errors that you made. Mishaneh shemo klomar ani acher ve'eno oto ha'ish she'asa otan ha'maasim, change your name to indicate that you are not the same person who made those choices. And finally, goleh mimkomo, physically leaving one's home, to leave a physical place in order to return to it later. Tshuva as a leaving and returning to physical space, knowing that upon returning you will know something new about yourself. You will have seen something else you couldn't see before. You will be able to continue the process of tshuva because you will understand much more clearly where you went wrong. You will see it and you will make a different choice. Leaving and coming back will change your vision. But leaving and coming back can also feel scary, not knowing what you'll find. Even if you can go back physically, a lot remains unknown. What will surface for you when you get there? What will be the same and what will be different? What will you learn about yourself? Maybe you'll be disappointed, embarrassed in your past self, or more painfully, in your present self. It could awaken countless difficult things, reminders of all the ways things could have been different, the potential and possibility that never came to be. We never know. It takes courage to go back, to revisit a place. In the book of Genesis, we see a story of someone going back, unsure, a return to a place with no sense of what might be discovered. A couple chapters after the Torah reading that we'll do together tomorrow morning, we find Isaac on the precipice of meeting his beloved Rebekah for the first time. And the Torah mentions, Yitzchak ba mi ba'o be'er l'chai ro'i, v'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. And Isaac was coming from be'er l'chai ro'i because he was settled in the Negev. Okay, nothing seems remarkable about that. The Torah loves to mention a random place, but this place isn't so random. We've seen it once before, just once, earlier in Genesis, and I first learned about these connections from our dear Rabbi David Kasher. When Avram and Sarai, not yet Abraham and Sarah, are struggling with fertility, Sarai encourages him to have a baby with Hagar, her maid, in order to have offspring for him. But when Hagar gets pregnant, Sarai does not respond well and is very harsh with her, and so she runs away. A messenger of God finds Hagar in the desert and talks to her and tells her about the son she will have, Ishmael, and the life that will unfold for her, that God has seen her suffering. She can't believe it, that in this moment in her life, a moment of desperation, she's encountering God. And then she says, Al kain kara be'er be'er l'chai ro'i, hine vein kadesh uvein bared. She named the place Be'er l'chai ro'i because it is the place where God appeared to her, where she was seen. And then Ishmael is born, and many years later, Isaac is born to Abraham and Sarah. Hagar and Ishmael move back in with the family, but later they are sent away again by Abraham and Sarah. And Ishmael grows up in the desert. The brothers have not seen each other for a very long time. But then we read, Yitzchak ba mi ba'o be'er l'chai ro'i. Isaac was coming from be'er l'chai ro'i. He went to the place where his brother was, the place where Hagar was, where she had fled all those years ago, where God had found her in her most desperate moments. He went to this physical place to try to understand something differently about himself, about his family, to try to start the process of tshuva, of repair with his brother. He could only do it by going to this physical place. back to a place that was in the fabric of his family, but in painful ways. And he had no idea what he would find. Would they welcome him? Would they reject him after everything they had been through? Would they be willing to work toward repair? And what would Isaac see in himself there? Would he be proud, discouraged, ashamed? It was surely a combination of all those things. But we learn that this trip must have shifted something in his relationship with his brother, because when their father Abraham dies, they are both there to bury him, Isaac and Ishmael. They have made it there together. They have worked toward repair. And then we're told after Abraham's death, Vayeshev Yitzchak im be'er lachai roi. Isaac settled near be'er lachai roi. He returned again to that place, back in the same physical place where Hagar and his brother Ishmael fled, the place that kept his brother from him for so long. And then the place he went to find him. The place he went so that he could learn something else about himself and his family, but also having no idea what would await him. The place he went to begin the process of tshuva and reconciliation. The place he went not only to find his brother, but to find himself. And then he settled there. He went back again. Hadran alach, we will return to you. He went back again, this time to complete his work with his brother, with himself. He had to go back to understand. He had to go back to repair. His tshuva required him to return to a place. And he's not the only person in the Torah for whom this is true. There's a story in the Midrash, the rabbinic biblical interpretation, that tells us about Joseph. Joseph, as many of you know, was the favorite son of his father, Jacob, and when he was a teenager, his brothers threw him into a pit and left him there. Many of them thought he had died, but instead he was sold to a group of people passing through, which began his journey to Egypt, where he worked his way up over time, high up into Pharaoh's cabinet, eventually being reunited with his brothers, and over time forgiving them and starting to move forward. And this is where the Midrash takes place. After the brothers' reconciliation and right after their father Jacob dies, Joseph and his brothers find themselves back home, close to the pit where they had originally thrown him decades before. He wanders over to the pit, to the same place where everything began so long ago, the exact same. He goes back, as though he is seeking something, waiting for something, as though this place will unearth something for him. And maybe he's afraid, unsure of what it is that he will learn all these years later, a lifetime of experiences in between. His brothers start to worry as they watch him. Maybe he will plot against them. Maybe he never really came to terms with everything his brothers had done to him. Maybe instead he's been waiting for this moment to rise up against them. Maybe what this place will do is motivate him to get back at them for the past. But instead, uverach alav, he blesses the pit. Kamo shechayav adam levarech al makom shena'asa lo nes, baruch hamakom she'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Like one who is obligated to bless a place in which a miracle has happened for them. Baruch hamakom, blessed are you, God, who made a miracle for me in this place. When he comes back to the pit, to this exact same place, so many years later, what he sees is a blessing. What he sees is how much he has grown and learned and changed. I imagine him standing over that pit like I stood outside those rickety doors of the diner, like I stood on that sidewalk outside. I see him perched there, looking down into it, visions of his whole life whirring past him, himself as a child, his father, his brothers, the pit, the treacherous time there, and then going to Egypt, his time in prison, interpreting dreams, working his way up to Pharaoh's cabinet, the drought, giving his brothers food, hiding from them, testing them, crying, and then eventually revealing himself to them, the repair, the reconciliation, the path they walked together, his father's death, and being able to be there to grieve with all his brothers at the end. All of this memory rushing past him. And then just gratitude for all of the miracles it took for him to get back here, to make this full return, this full tshuva with his brothers and also with himself. It took being back in this place to revisit his whole life. It took returning to see something else. Baruch hamakom shena'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Blessed are you, God, who made a miracle for me in this place. Maybe, for some of us, this place, this night, will be the one that allows us to see something else in ourselves, in our relationships, in the world. Maybe we'll have the experience here that Joseph had standing over the pit, memory rushing past us, glimpses and images and fragments of the path that led us here, listening to these same sounds, sitting in this same room. Maybe walking in here allowed you to access something long forgotten. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe you need to go back to the pit like Joseph. Maybe you need to go back to Be'er L'chai Roi. Maybe you need to go back to that coffee shop where you first met your partner. Maybe you need to go back to your grandma's favorite restaurant that you haven't been back to since she died. Maybe you need to go back to that hike you used to do with the friend you don't talk to anymore. Maybe you need to go back to the beach where you had that really painful conversation with your cousin, best friend, sister, mom, neighbor. Maybe you need to listen to that one song that you know always puts you back exactly in that summer after college. Maybe you need to get on a small plane and sit in the last row and make it to a tiny southern coastal town and walk up to a diner with doors that never really quite close. And when you start to cry, let that soften you and transport you. That's where the work begins. Shana Tova.